Alright, so moving on to the Incas. This is a map of... Oh, I'm not presenting, sorry. Alright, this is a map of their area. As you can see, it's south of Mexico, so they're south of the Aztecs and the Mayans. Basically where modern day Peru, Ecuador, and Chile are today. So all of this orange area on the coast is what the Incas claimed as their empire. So the Incas came about later than the Mayans and the Aztecs, and they began as a small tribe in the Andes, which is a mountain range. We go back. This mountain range right here is the Andes Mountains. So, like I said, they began as a small tribe in the Andes, but by 1500 their empire expanded along the entire Pacific coast and from one side of the Andes to the other. Excuse me. Alright, so the Incan government. They began expansion in the 1400s, and at the capital of Cuzco, the leader Pachacuti used political alliances and military force to control that huge territory. So you're going to see, this is kind of a tangent, but you're going to see a lot of similarities between the Incan culture and what's in The Emperor's New Groove, that old movie that I don't know if any of you have seen, but the Emperor's New Groove, he's supposed to be an Incan emperor. So that's why kind of the stuff you see is going to look like the stuff in that movie. Sorry, brain fart. Anyway, at its height in the 1500s, the Incan Empire controlled about 12 million people, so they needed a strong government to keep those people in line. And one of the ways they kept them in line was that when they conquered a village, they required the leaders of those villages to move out, and they would put in leaders who were loyal to the Incan Empire. And I think that's kind of sad, because just think about if whoever is kind of the leader of your community or your family, say it's your grandfather or your father, if you were taken over by someone, they would make that person who was the head of your community area move out, and they would bring in somebody you had no idea who they were, and they would be in charge of you. And I just think that's kind of cruel, but we'll move on. Alright, so the economy. Commoners were required to pay a labor tax called a mita, and this mita could literally be anything. So you could go weave cloth for the empire, and that could be your mita, or if you were a man, you could work on government-owned farms, or work in mines, or build a road, anything that the government said needed to be done. So this economy in the Incan Empire is a lot different from the Mayans, the Aztecs, or really anything that we've talked about, because there were no merchants or markets. The government actually distributed the goods, like food and clothing and stuff like that. They distributed them to the citizens, and anything that was left over, like the surplus, was stored for emergencies. So that's how the Incas supplied their army and people who were too old or too sick with the goods they needed. So that's just a different way of doing things that nobody else had really done up until this point. So some record keeping that we'll talk about in regards to the Inca Empire is called a quipu. And there was no writing system at the time, so this is kind of how they kept records. So this quipu is a set of knotted and colored cords that represented numbers and dates. So it recorded movement of goods, it could record tax records, livestock quantities, or the census, the population of the area. And this picture here is a quipu. Don't ask me how to read it, because nobody really knows. It's sort of been deciphered by historians and archaeologists, but we really don't know exactly how they kept records with this. You can see that some of the ropes are knotted and some of them aren't. We're thinking that, like, if it's a knot, it means maybe it's 1,000 or 10. We just don't really know. But this is how they kept records for, just for interest's sake. All right, so the society in the Inca Empire was highly structured. So communities were called ayllus, and these ayllus consisted of a couple of families working together to farm and build in their area of the community. So 10 ayllus were united under one chief, and that chief would report to a higher government official. And that government official usually had 10 or so chiefs reported to him, and each of those 10 chiefs had 10 ayllus, and so on and so forth in groups of 10 until the top of the chain, which was the emperor. Excuse me. So all of the upper class lived in the capital of Cuzco, and in aspects of religion, they had a lot of gods, but the sun god was the most important god in the Inca religion. So priests would perform ceremonies for the sun god at the main temple, and unlike the Aztecs and the Mayans, the Incas only sacrificed humans on rare occasions. So think of it as like Christmas is the only time Thanksgiving is the only time you have a big turkey. That's kind of really when they only sacrifice humans. So that's a little different. All right, some achievements. The Incas were extremely accomplished builders. They didn't actually need mortar to hold their blocks together. If you know anything about brickwork, you know that in order to keep the bricks together, you put a layer of sort of like concrete in between each brick. They didn't even need that because they cut their blocks so precisely. And they built their temples and other stuff so well that many of them still exist today. And one of these areas that still exists is Machu Picchu. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard of it, but Machu Picchu is thought to be sort of a retreat or a resort for the Incan emperor. So you can see here they've got some terrace farming going on. These are original structures. So from the 1500s, see how they're blocks. These are all individual bricks and blocks. You see how they're so precise that you can't even really fit a knife through them if you tried. They were also especially skilled in like metalwork and weaving, and artisans would make ornaments out of gold and silver. And they even created a life-sized field of corn out of gold and silver in a temple courtyard. So in spite of the high level of organization and achievement, the Incan Empire only lasted about 100 years because it began to suffer from internal conflict. And what would put the final nail in the coffin for the Incan Empire is the arrival of the Spanish in 1532. So that was also the final nail in the coffin for the Aztecs, and that's why we're talking about this now and not when we're talking about early civilizations earlier in the semester. I wanted to come back and pick this up so that it was fresh in your mind, so that you knew and remembered how different these religions and cultures and societies were from the Spanish societies. So we'll talk a little bit tomorrow and the next couple of days what kind of fate the natives would fear at the hands of the Spanish, and we'll talk about just kind of the differences, the culture clash that happened, and why the Aztecs and the Incans are not really anymore.